building things and working cooperatively with other people as opposed to basically subjecting them to a colonial power like the United States. The United States is behaving much like the old colonial powers. But China, I just saw today. It looks like the head of their Department of Defense, Ministry of Defense, is now an admiral. Previously, they'd gone with an army general. I think that's sort of an ominous signal because it shows that China now recognizes that when war comes with the United States, and it's coming, because there are too many people in the West that have convinced themselves that we're going to fight China. China is preparing to do so on recognizing that it's going to be a naval battle. And they recognize the United States has actually, despite have this very large, expensive Navy, it doesn't have as many ships as China, and its defense capabilities can be quickly overcome with a combination of drones and cruise missiles. So, China, this move by China, I think, reflects that they recognize the United States is no longer a reliable negotiating partner. They've come to the same conclusion that the Russians have. And that's why Russia, with Chinese and Indians, South Africans, and Brazil, are working on this new world economic order and going to create an alternative to the United States controlled order. And the United States still hasn't come to grips with that. We're going to be fighting desperately to hang on to it. But I think the things that China is doing throughout Africa and the Middle East is one other way that they're eliminating U.S. influence.
When it comes to the Middle East, with what's going on with Israel right now, in Washington, do they have any clear understanding of what's going on with these Arab nations, with their policy?
Right now, the American-Israeli Political Action Committee has bought Congress. Congress is bought and paid for. So even if the majority of the American people said, hey, we think that the Israelis are a bunch of murderous thugs, that they are committing crimes that are on par with what the Nazis did to the Jews in World War II, and we want to punish Israel, it's not going to happen because too many members of Congress have got financial support directly from the American-Israeli Political Action Committee, and they're not going to buck them. So the Israelis basically own Washington, D.C. That's an uncomfortable truth, because the United States has a lot of power that it could, cut Israel off at the knees right now and shut them down cold from this, war of genocide that they're carrying out against the Palestinians. There has been, over the last 20 years. So with the start of the war on terror, that was the beginning when people started trying to wake up and say, oh, what's the difference between Sunni and Shia? What's the difference between Arab and Persian? The average American was, they all look alike, Shia, Sunni, what difference does it matter? Well, it makes a big difference, as well as the differences between Arabs and Persians. So we go back into ancient history with all of that. And you don't see a lot of real well-informed discussion on it. A friend of mine who's deceased, Pat Lang, he established the first Arabic program at West Point back in 1975, I believe. And he was a foreign area specialist. He spoke Arabic, served as defense attaché in Yemen and Saudi Arabia. Candidly, I don't think we have anybody else like Pat in the ranks right now. So you're operating with an ignorance level, and the U.S. blind support for Israel in the face of trying to punish Russia, and then with the union between Russia and China has created a new opening so that both Putin and Xi Jinping are being well received when they travel into the Middle East, when they travel to United Arab Emirates or to Saudi Arabia. They're getting a hero's welcome, whereas the United States is not. So U.S. influence in the region has been drastically eroded, and their sort of unprincipled support for Israel and tolerance, enabling of the Israelis to murder so many women and children in Palestine is just adding to the disgust.
We've seen that the tensions between Netanyahu and Erdogan from Turkey is increasing.
Erdogan's a gas bag. He's like some girl in middle school and high school, talking bad about Netanyahu. They're both like juveniles in that regard. Oh, you're Hitler. Well, Erdogan actually could do something to hurt Israel if he wanted. Number one, he could cut off the supply of oil that goes through Turkey to Israel. Well, he's not going to do that because I suspect him or someone in his family or someone close, a close supporter, are making a lot of money off of that deal. So he's not going to jeopardize that. So yeah, he can go out and call Netanyahu names, and it's going to get press coverage, but it means nothing. The killing goes on. He could put together his navy and a humanitarian rescue mission and sell it directly towards Israel to challenge the Israelis, dare them to start shooting at the Turks. He won't do that. So that's it. I watch it. I'm disgusted by it because he's all about cheap talk and no action. That's Erdogan.
How do you find it right now, the situation in the Red Sea with Houthis?
The Houthis have created a real challenge to American leadership in as far as being a naval power, and exposed that America is very weak. The reality is that the Houthis have a large enough supply of anti-ship missiles and drones that if they decide to launch to swarm a U.S. Destroyer, it would overwhelm that ship's ability to fire back and fight those missiles off. Well, the Houthis, they're not prepared to go that far yet, but based upon what they had done up to this point, in 30, 40 years ago, the United States would have already been bombing inside Yemen. We're not doing it now. And the reason we're not doing it now is because the Navy admirals, the ones with still some brains in their heads, realize that if they start firing at Yemen, it's going to escalate the situation. Yemen's then going to have ample reason to start firing at the Navy ships. And those ships they don't have enough missiles on board to fend off those attacks. And once they fire those missiles, the only way they can get reloaded is they're going to have to sail to a nearby port because the ships do not have the ability to reload at sea. U.S. Navy, about 30 plus years ago, thought it was a good idea to eliminate what they call ship tenders. These ships are basically supply ships that sail behind the battleships and could then pull alongside to give them new ammunition, new rockets, missiles, help load the tubes, provide food, everything they need. They got rid of those. They do it now they set up bases around the world. And so after you run out of ammunition, then you sell off to a base to get refitted. Well, the Houthis now realize that about the United States. I mean, I'm not revealing state secrets. This has all been, published in unclassified publications. So the United States is, I think, genuinely worried that if they start attacking targets in Yemen, they're not going to be able to sustain it to finish it. They're going to be a lot like what Israel's doing in Gaza, killing a lot of civilians, not achieving much militarily.
It seems to me that Netanyahu would be more than happy if the United States started a new war in the Middle East. How a new conflict in the Middle East between the United States and any other country would benefit Israel?
Well, they feel if the United States is having to fight, that it's going to ease pressure on Israel to back off. Because the United States is starting to pressure Israel that, hey, you got to bring this to an end. And the political pressures against Israel are growing domestically inside Israel. The hostage families are becoming more incensed, I think, with each passing day. There's just a report came out this week in Haaretz, the liberal Israeli newspaper, reporting on what happened with those 3 Israeli hostages that had escaped from Hamas and were trying to get it back into Israeli lines, and the Israeli soldiers shot them. And when you go through that report, you realize how poorly trained these Israeli soldiers are. Number one, they're young, they're inexperienced. I mean, one of the guys said, "Yeah, they asked me, did you hear the order ceasefire?" He goes, "Oh yeah, but I thought it was only just for a moment." You know, my God, that's one of the reasons you go through basic training. You learn that when they say cease fire, you cease fire. You don't start firing again until given a command to fire. Number one. Uh, and then it gets to issues like rules of engagement. These soldiers are clearly taught you can shoot anybody even if they're not carrying a gun, which is a war crime. That is just a war crime. So you've got all these pressures building on Netanyahu, and then on top of it, the losses, the casualties the Israelis are suffering, both in terms of men killed in action, wounded in action, as well as equipment. Those numbers are growing, and I think the Israelis are lying about the actual numbers. They're trying to cover that up as much as possible.
What's the reason behind this killing of Iranian generals in Syria?
I know there were reports earlier today that the Israelis hit a site in Damascus at the airport and killed 11 Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders. I don't think that's true. I think that's Israeli propaganda. In fact, I think they put that story out just to feed a false story out so you can see who starts talking to be able to actually locate where these people are. If they said, Pervez, where are you? Is Pervez dead? No, I'm here. I'm okay. You start giving away your locations. That's a possibility. They did kill that other commander, though. He was struck and killed. And it's a stupid policy. God, people just, they don't learn. Back during when the Algerian Civil War was raging, and the armed Islamic group, GIA, the Grupo Islami Army, was fighting the French. The French came up with this idea of let's kill off the leadership. If we kill off the leadership, that'll weaken the organization. Well, when they killed off the leadership, it made the armed Islamic group more violent. Why? Because now that the senior leaders were gone, the guys who were, let's say, a little older, more mature, who would counsel, being cautious or not overreacting, they were no longer there to put the brakes on. So now you wound up with all these younger guys who are a bunch of hotheads, and they carried out more violent actions, not less. We saw the same thing with the going after the drug cartels. One of my former business partners he was the architect of what was called the Kingpin program. And the idea in theory was if you take out the upper echelon, the leadership of these cartels, they'll fall apart. Well, it turns out the cartels are a lot like mercury. If you hit a big glob of mercury with a hammer, what happens? Fragments, goes off in different directions, and they each can start up operating on their own. So Israel's making that same mistake now with Hezbollah. If they're going to try to kill off the leadership, I guarantee you're going to get more radical guys in charge, and they're going to carry out more destructive, devastating attacks against Israel than anything Israel has seen. So I think it's a very foolish approach.
Lindsey Graham, in his latest interview with Fox News, said, hit Iran. How do you find the situation right now, and why he's suggesting that?
It's ignorance, just flat out ignorance. He's watched too many movies. I guess he was, a fanboy of Tom Cruise at Top Gun 2. And, oh boy, the United States can fly anywhere and we can hit anything. And so I just tell people, I say, okay, take a step back. Do you remember what happened in January of 1991 in Iraq? where we had complete control of the air. Saddam did not have an air force that could come up and challenge us. They didn't have an active air defense system. And even with all of that, our air power was not able to conquer Iraq. We had to send troops in on the ground, and they struggled to get control of the place. We tried to find Scuds. We couldn't find Scud missiles, these mobile launchers that were running around firing missiles into Israel. So this magical belief, the belief in the magic of U.S. military power to hit a target and take it out, no, that's not going to happen. What's going to happen is, yeah, we could kill some Iranians, we could damage some Iranian infrastructure, but we don't have enough planes that we can put in the air to fly there, and then planes that are going to face actually real air defense. So the Iranians, at a minimum, have the old Soviet S-300 systems, which are very efficient and effective. So all it's going to do is give Iran then a reason to retaliate against Israel. It could take out most of Israel with its long-range missiles, conventional warheads. It doesn't have to use nukes. This is crazy talk from my old friend used to call Lindsey Graham the little old lady from South Carolina.
When it comes to Russia and China, if that happens between the United States and Iran, what would be the reaction of Russia and China, in your opinion?
They could very well get in on the side of Iran. They've been carrying out joint military exercises with the Iranians since 2016, 2017. So they started off with talks, and then they went into planning, and then I think they did the first exercise about 4 years ago, 2019, 2018. But the Chinese depend heavily on oil that comes out of the Persian Gulf, and Russia has been working on developing a relationship with Iran. So they've conducted not just joint naval exercises, but they've also done some joint military exercises on the ground. So I think that's another factor that both the United States and Israel need to take into account if they're willing to provoke this and run the risk of it escalating into a direct confrontation with Russia and China. The United States is not in a position to fight that battle.
Just recently, Putin tried to solve the problems between Armenia and Azerbaijan. We've seen that with Iran and Saudi Arabia. When it comes to Palestine, when it comes to Israel, why the United States is not willing to do such a thing?
Because the American-Israeli Political Action Committee, which is a direct extension of the government of Israel, has cast the situation as you're either with us or against us. And they've been pretty effective in appealing to Christians, evangelical Christians, who believe that the Jews are entitled to this piece of land and nobody else is, and that they're the chosen people, and this is biblical prophecy coming to pass. There's no political group in the United States with enough clout right now to shift U.S. policy away from its, complete support of Israel, regardless of what Israel does.
You know that the public opinion in the United States is not totally in line with the Netanyahu administration's policy in Gaza.
Right.
Majority of people are against this type of policies in Gaza. But is that going to be reflected in the Congress?
Not yet. We'll find out when they come back from recess. I suspect that most of the Republicans will come back with convinced they need to continue to support Israel. I think you'll see growing fissures within the Democrat Party. People like Ilhan Omar and the ones in Presley from
Cortez.
Yeah, they're going to come. Their constituents are more likely to be less supportive of Israel and would demand that they take action. So it's going to it's going to actually probably work to the advantage of the Republicans against the Democrats. But it's not going to change the policy. The policy of continuing to support Israel, I think, is they're going to continue to do it as long as Israel is willing to go destroy itself. And that's one of the, if the United States was really a true friend of Israel, we would be having an intervention with the Israelis because they're destroying themselves. They have basically, they're being held hostage by the most extreme radical elements among the Zionists, and it's not going to end well for them. They're enjoying, right now they're killing thousands of women and children, and their conduct in the battlefield is reprehensible. They're acting. It's reminiscent of what the Nazis did, and I've had actually a Jewish friend say that to me. This particular lady's mother was a survivor of one of the concentration camps, and under the Nazis. So she is a child of a Holocaust survivor, and she said she's just sickened by what she's seeing because it reminds her of what the Nazis did to the Jews. And you've seen these images where the Israeli occupation force is lining, going to gather up all these Palestinian men, stripping them to their underwear and making them kneel on the ground with their hands behind their head. You want to see what a contrast with an actual professional army is? Go look at the video of what the Russians did after they captured Mariupol and they forced the surrender of the Azov battalion. Genuine Nazis, honest to God Nazis coming out, Nazi tattoos, etc. The Russians did not strip them of their clothes. They did line them up in front of there was two soldiers per guy's conscript surrendering, or opponent surrendering. And then they did a pat down and made sure that they didn't have any weapons on them. And then they went through their gear to make sure they didn't have any weapons in their gear, and then put them on a bus. They treated them with respect. Well, the Israelis said, well, how do we know? They could have a suicide vest on. That's, when they come up to surrender, you can have them pull their shirt up, but you don't strip them naked and then keep them like that in that condition. So it's one of those signs of both really how evil the Israelis have become. They are behaving like wild animals, not like professional soldiers.
If Donald Trump wins 2024, Trump would be more in line with the Netanyahu administration, or he's going to convince them to go after some sort of political settlement?
No, I think he'll go for the deal. That's Donald Trump. He prided himself on developing a relationship with the Saudis, and that through his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, working on the Abraham Accords, Trump developed some real credibility within the Zionist community by virtue of moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, as many politicians had long vowed to do, but never did. So on that count alone, he has got some credibility. So I would see his first step is trying to, get Israel to stop killing. And look, it's going to be over by then anyway. Israel cannot continue this, what they're doing. And they are, I think, ultimately are going to exhaust themselves because they don't have the ability to sustain long combat operations. So I think Trump would actually be the one that could get Israel back to a negotiating table, but it would probably be without Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu is being treated like a leprosy patient by the rest of the Israeli political spectrum. They don't like him. That said, the Israelis they believe they got to stay in and continue to fight to do whatever they can to kill the Palestinians, but that doesn't mean that they unequivocally support Benjamin Netanyahu.
How do you find the future of Netanyahu?
Well, Netanyahu is going to be replaced, and once he's replaced, he's looking possibility of going to prison for corruption. But it leaves a lot of questions about what happens now to the Palestinians. As long as the Israelis continue to unlawfully enter these Palestinian territories and arbitrarily arrest and detain Palestinians and shoot and kill them, Palestinians aren't going to have any peace. This is, I think, this is sowing the seeds for generations that will seek revenge. So Israel can't just disappear these, can't send them to a moon colony somewhere where they're not going to be able to attack them. So I think Israel's really created a problem for itself. And especially if they decide to escalate and go after Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been steadily increasing its rate of fire and its attack on Israeli positions in northern Israel. So, it would not at all surprise me that the Hezbollah could really wind up being a game changer in this whole equation. They'd force, militarily defeat Israel, because Israel cannot fight a two-front war. They put Israel in the position of thinking that it would potentially have to use nukes. So I mean, there's no clear escape path yet. As long as the United States continues to completely back Israel, Israel is going to continue to do what it's doing. If the United States pulls the plug, then Israel is going to be forced to negotiate, because it will not be able to sustain the military operation without full backing of the United States.
China seems to be imposing economic sanctions on Israel because Israel is facing difficulties importing electronic components from China. An Israeli official said that it's connected to the war. How do you find it? Is that related to the war, or it's a bigger picture, is the fight between the United States and China?
Well, I think it's a combination of the two. It's not either or. In fact, that's the beauty of it, at least from the Chinese standpoint, is they can send a double message. It both hurts Israel and hurts the United States. Again, I think when I saw the news today that the Chinese are moving to put an admiral in charge of their military, that's a big shift. Before they were focused on land, and let's be candid about it, the Chinese army has always been a pretty pathetic entity. Really big, not very good. Hell, the Vietnamese beat them back in 1979. So it really it calls into question their competence. Different story for the Navy, and so the Chinese are acknowledging they're gonna be fighting the United States and have to be prepared for that. And so the Chinese, I think, are much more so than the United States. They're looking at this as the big picture. They're looking at this both in terms of relations with the United States, relations with Israel, relations with the Arab countries. The Chinese, they don't see any upside to going in and backing Israel when the majority of the Muslims around the world are just outraged by it.